discuss the events of the Chase or playoff opener at Darlington, among other things. I'm your host, Jake. With me, as always, is Ryan, my friend and colleague of RJM Analytics, to analyze the race and talk about the statistics and all the other rigmarole of the weekend, and our ostensible third member, Adam. And that was, race-wise, just like kind of a typical Darlington event that we had yesterday. Like, not bad, but just not amazing either. But it was certainly an active night when it came to external events, shall we say, that affected a lot of guys that were in the chase. And we have a really funky kind of standing in the points right now. So I'll just probably have some things to say later, but for now, I'll just turn it over to Ryan and say what's on your mind.
Yeah, so first of all, that Jones boy, we'll be talking a lot about him today. Even though I will obviously be the first to admit he was not the best car all night, only won due to some fortuitous circumstances, but I think when you got a guy who's in really kind of second-rate equipment who wins like that, I mean, you can't expect him to be dominating races, and he had to earn that win, even though Truex and Kyle Busch were better all night. He had to hold off Hamlin, who, of course, somehow manages to be one guy who got the good Gibbs engine, and Tyler Reddick also had a really good car. So I've been hyping him up all season. I think for all the talk that guys like Reddick and Ross Chastain and Daniel Suarez have gotten this year, that it's been deservedly so for having their breakout years, so to speak. I think Jones has been just as good as basically all of them. When you consider he's really driving for a team that's, I mean, it's hard to judge how good they are since his teammate is Ty Dillon, who sucks, but I would say they're probably about as good, maybe slightly worse than RCR, and yeah, all my metrics have had him as a top 10 driver all season, and the one that I've been just screwing around with ATDR, I'm calling it. It's kind of like a more advanced version of ETDR that uses ETDR as its base formula and also takes into account more the passing and the equipment, and Jones is currently a top 5 driver this season in that, which, I mean, it might sound crazy, but, I mean, last night, and he was able to do at tracks like Fontana and Pocono, running the top 5 all day there. It's really, I mean, we've just got such a close field this year that I feel like he's been as good as just about, anybody aside from a few drivers. And this has been really the breakout season that's been going under the radar all year. And I think now, finally, even though this arguably wasn't even his best race of the year, I'm glad that people are talking about him now because of it. As for the race itself, I think, your typical kind of Darlington attrition fest, maybe even more so than usual, which we were talking about it last week. I personally think Darlington as a pure racing product track is pretty overrated. What really gives the track its appeal is that it's, you got to be able to survive and be around at the end, which, you can't blame drivers for having parts failures or anything, but it really is a test of man and machine, and you saw that on display and then some last night. So it was an interesting race. I'll definitely give it that. Sure, we'll be talking more later about all the parts failures, but yeah, I found it pretty enjoyable, and obviously having a winner who was well overdue this season helped with that.
Yeah, for me, the race, was pretty much what I expected. Like I said before the week, that it'd be all right, but definitely not as good as the spring race. And for the record, I am, for having a fair amount of long races on the schedule. And, I'm glad that the Southern 500 exists and that it's on the schedule and that it's at its traditional date. But it's one track where shorter races are usually better. just at least from a racing standpoint. Like we saw quite a bit more action in the May race. But this one wasn't terrible, but it just wasn't anything amazing. It was, I'd say, better than the last two Southern 500s that we had. Just like, it'd be a lower half race for this season, but that's more of, a compliment to how good the racing has usually been this year than it is a knock on this particular event. As far as like the attrition rate, like what was really weird and kind of bizarre about it is that, yes, we often see it at Darlington, but almost none of it was actually wrecks, or even if it was wrecks, it wasn't due to driver error. Like we saw so many things happen with, Chase losing a tire, the electrical problem that Kyle Larson had early on, but then sort of half recovered from, the weird issue that Chastain had, and of course, like the two cars that dominated the race, Kyle Busch and Martin Truex, losing an engine, and Kyle Busch even losing one under yellow. And so it was really weird in that respect. And needless to say, I don't think the point standings right now look anything like we expected them to after the first race. Which I think that the guys like Chase and all them that have been strong throughout the season will be fine ultimately, because they do still at least have some of a buffer because of all the playoff points that they had. But it's not a gimme now, and that's like the downside of this point system, where it can just take like a couple of bad weeks, that can be it for you. But it should be fine. That was probably the most wild opening to a chase when it comes to championship implications, as Rick Allenbot would say it, that we've had in a long time.
My real takeaway from this race is that it was something straight out of the 1980s. We had just all parts failures and weird things happening that you just don't see anymore. Like the fact that if you look at the cause of DNF, we had two different drivers DNF due to exhaust and one due to a water pump. And it's like, how often do we see that? We never do. So yeah, it was, I feel like early in the year we had a lot of mechanical issues with the new car, but as time has gone on, the teams have gotten a better handle on it, and we seem to not be having this as much. But at Darlington, all that got thrown out the window, and it just everything started breaking left and right. And it was that part of it. I'm not gonna lie. Now that being said, I wish that the leaders of the race hadn't blown engines, because that's kind of a lame way to lose a race. And I feel genuinely bad for Kyle Busch and Martin Truex. But overall, I think the attrition made the race more interesting, because the on-track, like, just pure racing and passing product was pretty lackluster. There were only 4 on-track lead changes in 500 miles, which is not very good. And I did enjoy the different strategy plays too, where some guys were doing like a 2-stop strategy in a stage, others did 1, and it's always fun to see how those things work out. And then as far as Eric Jones, like, I think this was not his best race of the season. I think Fontana probably was, but he is long overdue for a win, and he's been overachieving in his equipment all year, and I'm really glad that he got a win. I'll be interested to see how Noah Gragson does with that team next year, to see if are the cars really pretty good and Ty Dillon just sucks, or is Eric Jones just way better than his equipment? And it's hard to really know, so I'm eager to find out next year.
I think it's kind of as far as Jones goes, I think it's kind of a combination of both. I think the cars are better than what Ty Dillon is running, but probably not as good as how he's running. And it kind of reminds me of arc that his career has taken ever since leaving Joe Gibbs Racing. It kind of reminds me of like Casey Kane, sort of in reverse, because like it was the same team, or an older iteration of it when he was at Petty and Evernham before that. You know, that team's been through so many mergers at this point. It's like he was always, really overachieving there. He got to be the number one driver on that team for a number of years and had pretty mediocre teammates like Elliott Sadler at the end of his career. And it was like everybody said, oh, when he goes to Hendrick, he's going to start dominating. And then he was kind of, underachieving there when he was kind of the redheaded stepchild, the number 4 guy on that team with Jimmy and Jeff and Dale Jr. all there, and then Chase at the end. And so I think Jones, kind of at the beginning of his career, he never really got the chance to flourish with Gibbs because he had the worst pit crew there by a country mile, it seemed like. I don't think Chris Gale was a very good Cup crew chief. And it seemed like there was just, I'm generally not one of those guys who thinks, certain drivers on teams get preferential treatment. But it definitely seemed like there was a higher priority on the drivers who were there, Kyle Busch, Hamlin, Truex, who were winning, than there was on developing Jones, especially when Toyota had Christopher Bell as kind of their pet project that whole time, who they were really eager to get him up to Cup. And so it just kind of seemed like Jones was, the odd man out there really from the get-go. He was more Kyle's protege. Toyota never really seemed like they were committed to him. And I think now that he's gotten this chance to really, have this home, so to speak, with Petty GMS, where he's their featured driver, he's the face of their team, and it's just a lot like Daniel Suarez, actually, as well. Except I think Jones has been better than Suarez this year, considering the equipment difference. They've both been thriving now that they have more of a priority on them and just a better team around them. Dave Ellens, I think, is a really good crew chief who I was actually, a couple of years ago, I was kind of begging for Hendrick to replace Alan Gustafson with him when Gustafson was constantly costing Chase wins on strategy. So I'm really happy for him. Seems like just a guy with a good head on his shoulders. Even if he's not like the most vibrant personality, I think he's just a really likable guy. And yeah, great to see him win.
I personally see him as, at this point, like a less interesting Ward Burton. Like, not a bad guy personality, but, just nothing, like you said, vibrant either. But as a driver, he's about that level of driver with probably about what Bill Davis Racing was, at least, during certain points of Ward's career, maybe not at their very best, and good at seemingly the same racetracks. So that's about how I see him at this point.
Yeah. Sean last night was comparing him to Sterling Marlin, which, I don't know, I feel like that's maybe a bit of a next level up. I'm not sure I would ever see Jones, leading the point standings for a full season, even if Marlin in 2002 was all just kind of consistency stroking. But, definitely a guy who can have probably a Casey Kane type career, like I said, maybe just without the one huge bust-out 6-win season or whatever, which, that's not a bad career at all.
I echo what Ryan was saying about Eric Jones being in a better position, as the top dog of a middling team, rather than being a fourth driver at an elite team. I think that's, it seems like a lot of drivers, like you said, with Casey Kane and Jamie McMurray, was way better as the lead driver at Ganassi than he was being the fifth driver at Roush. Some guys just seem to thrive when they can be, the main focus of a team rather than being kind of the undercard. So, and like you said, I'm happy for Eric Jones, and I kind of think and hope that he'll settle into a nice role at Petty GMS for a number of years now. And, to me, he seems like a one-win-a-year kind of guy, and he'll probably settle into that. And, if I had to guess, he'll probably retire with, I don't know, 8 to 10 wins. And I think that serves him right.
Yeah. That sounds about right to me. I think, assuming that Gragson will be an improvement on Ty Dillon, his advanced metrics probably will not be as good next year or in the future. But I definitely don't think that's to say like he's having what's going to end up being the best year of his career. He could absolutely have a type of season with 2 or 3 wins. Jamie McMurray had 2010 where he was lightning fast a lot of weeks. I think for a guy who, a lot like Suarez, was kind of left for dead, last year he didn't have that good of a season because Petty sucked last year, and really had for a while, I guess, ever since they lost Kane, and then it was, I think they got even worse after they lost Amarola and all his Smithfield money. They were really trying to string stuff together that whole time that Bubba was there, and it was always like, it would always be that medallion company that Petty owns, I think, that would sponsor them. It was basically unsponsored. It seems like they have funding now, and they have the GMS Alliance has really helped them a lot, and I think it's just as good for the sport that that team is competitive again as it is for Eric Jones's career. And because, let's be real, when the 43 is competitive, that's just good for the sport. It's like, even if not everybody likes them, I think it's good for the NFL when the Dallas Cowboys are good, or good for the NBA when the LA Lakers are good. It's like, that's, NASCAR's historically biggest brand, and if they have a driver like Eric Jones who can get them in victory lane every once in a while, that's just really good.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I thought that the Petty team was going to fold in the next few years because of the lack of sponsorship and the fact that Richard himself is kind of just fading out of the picture. And I kind of thought that after Bubba left and some of his sponsors went with him, that they had maybe 1 or 2 years left before disappearing. But I am very thankful that didn't happen. Though, to be fair, I think it's mostly a GMS operation at this point, and Petty's kind of just a namesake. But either way, it's like you said, it's great to see the 43 winning again, and it is just good for the sport to see that car doing well. So hopefully the team can have a renaissance and become, I don't think they'll ever be a championship contender, but if they could become, a consistent top 15 level team in the next 2 years, that would be amazing. And I think that would only be good for NASCAR.
Yeah, I wanted to say that this race, this win for them, was the first win for both the Petty team and the 43 car in a completed race since John Andretti, the late, great John Andretti, in Martinsville of 1999. So 23 years since the last time we saw it.
Yeah, John Andretti, I think, is another kind of a good comparison for Jones, although Jones will probably have a more lasting career than Andretti did in NASCAR. It's even back then, I think that was a pretty second-tier team, and Andretti really overachieved in that car too. And the fact that his teammate at that point was Kyle Petty, who probably should have retired about a decade before he actually did. But yeah, I think what we wanted to talk about next, though, was all the mechanical issues. So obviously, one that kind of got everyone talking last night was Harvick catching on fire, and NASCAR inexplicably waiting 30 seconds to throw the caution because it was in the middle of the pit stops, which I think, first of all, I pretty much think I can speak for everybody here in saying, NASCAR, if you're going to preach safety, then be consistent with it, I think Harvick, for as much of a hypocrite as he is, he had a lot of points in what he said. They wouldn't let him race at Watkins Glen because of a few puddles. Then the very next week, they wait until it starts pouring down rain and the whole field crashes. And they ended the Xfinity race at Daytona because a guy spun by himself on the last lap, got back going again, and then they held the caution until they take the white flag. And then even just last night, they threw a caution a couple laps into the race because of a few sprinkles, which was pretty predictable after last week. But, it was barely raining at all. They probably could have raced through that without any problems. They didn't even red flag it. They go right back racing. And then we have the, all the parts failure stuff. And we saw, it wasn't just the Harvick incident, it was a couple of guys slammed the wall pretty hard under green, no caution. Cody Ware did it a couple of different times and was apparently pretty shaken up. And the Harvick thing, NASCAR never likes to throw the caution in the middle of green flag pit stops, but that was that was completely fucking ridiculous. How long they let that go green, literally until Harvick was climbing out of his car. I think though about the whole parts failure thing itself, it's like Rodney Childers was going off on Twitter after the race about how this happens every week, and it's all the cars fall, but like we really haven't had this happen every week. We had the one minor Chris Buescher thing at the Indy Roval, which, speaking of safety hypocrisy, it would have killed his race if they hadn't been able to get it done within the DVP clock. So obligatory DVP clock sucks. Needs to get rid of. Screwed Chase's night last night. But yeah, it's like we've really not been seeing this a whole lot this year. And last night it was kind of just, I don't know what it was that caused last night to be so much different from all the races we've seen the last couple of months. But maybe just a product of the track being tough on equipment. Maybe Gibbs and Hendrick, I guess, could have both brought bad engine packages to the track that weren't able to last. And I think when it's a guy like Harvick, who is notoriously, always the first guy to complain about stuff when it happens to him, but doesn't really speak up the rest of the time. He's perfectly fine if it's benefiting him. It comes across as a bit hollow and a bit old man yelling at cloud-ish, but he did have some points.
Yeah. Well, several things here, I guess to address. First thing, I was going to talk about this last week, but I just never got around to it. I never could think of it or say it. Never got a really good opportunity to say it, and I never did really remember it because my memory's pretty bad these days. But, yeah, we know what happened last week, the Daytona thing that we really didn't get into much. And it was very predictable how the reaction was, like especially from the fans. And I have to say, it really pissed me off and really annoyed me how, like, the reaction from social media, in that, I don't have a problem with calling out safety issues in NASCAR and where they sometimes get things wrong. But so many of these people, are the same people that have been chirping for years about how these guys anymore, they're not men, there's not real racing, these guys aren't tough, it's just a bunch of wusses out there. And then the second that it seems like
Christopher Bell.
Yeah, the second that somebody actually might get hurt, they change their tune. They're all worried about safety. They acted like the world ended because they raced a bit too long at Daytona before it started raining, which I'm just going to say, I mean, it sucks what happened, and in a perfect world, it shouldn't have, but I'm always going to be an advocate, and maybe this is just me speaking from a fan point of view and not like from, the people that actually have to drive the race cars and have to work on them and all the money that it costs them. So I realize that I'm speaking from a bit of like privilege here, you could say, but I'm always have been and always will be an advocate of racing for as long as you possibly can before you absolutely have to give it up. I mean, every race, in the chat we do it, and we talk about it, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's right, but every week, we chant every time that there's like a caution, anytime that there's rain, if there's rain on the way, we always say, well, get them going, get going before it starts raining. Let's get in as much race as we can. And, look, I'm sorry, but, people, they come to see the race. At the end of the day, it is for entertainment. That doesn't mean that we have to go crazy with it, but, the reaction to it was all too predictable, and it was not the least bit surprising that, that we ended up having basically like a 10-minute caution flag for puddles in the infield, but whatever, it didn't end up being a big deal, and so that's good at least. But as far as the rest of the stuff, like the stuff about the components in the car breaking that don't normally happen, I just chalk that up to the fact that, obviously, as Harvick referenced, we have the parts for these cars are not all provided by the teams themselves. NASCAR provides them all through themselves, through one supplier, which on one hand, it's supposed to lower costs for the teams and also kind of levels the playing field more, gives the richer teams less of an advantage, which is a good thing. But I guess you could say the con of that is the fact that with this being the first year, and also the fact that things were put kind of behind even more by the pandemic at the end of last year and early this year, there was, I believe, a part shortage that went all the way up into the spring. Everyone's kind of still behind, and you have to expect things like this are going to happen. This isn't anything new. This kind of stuff happened with the COT too. Like we all remember, I think it was Martinsville in 2007 that Harvick had a similar issue. Like, that was like the second race that that car ever had. And so, it's unfortunate, but I feel like it might not all get fixed by the end of this season, but I'm not too worried about it being a long-lasting factor because, again, everybody just kind of had to start with a clean slate and had to start behind this year. So, I have faith that that won't be a big problem going forward. As far as, like, the engine problems that Gibbs had, like, that was another thing where because this is a new car, which we've talked about how in the past, like recently, these cars have gotten so indestructible nowadays that it almost feels like long races don't really matter in the way that they used to. It's not an endurance test. But I think this car, at least temporarily, has kind of changed it back to where it is kind of a test of man and machine, where this is one of the few races that we had that are going to get near 4 hours, one of the only 500-mile races that we had, and they probably didn't build equipment that was durable enough for it. And, I don't like to see it, but I guess it is kind of interesting that we saw something like that has been very rare in these days. And I guess you could say that's part of the charm of races like this, the Southern 500, and at least the way it used to be. And we saw a bit of an old school event in that respect. And as far as Harvick goes, I mean, yeah, I agree. He had some maybe valid points. But at the end of the day, like Ryan said, if it was somebody else, he would not be saying anything about this. This is the guy that, that said that Dale Jr. was partially what stunted the sport's growth, even though he had about 25 concussions or whatever. So, and then Rodney Childers, like, this isn't the first time that he's mouthed off. Like, I think it was after Nashville that he went after some fan on Twitter and then deleted it, deleted his tweet afterwards. And so he's, I guess, taken after his driver when it comes to being a grumpy old man. But it's just I don't really know much more to say. I mean, you guys know my feelings are on him. I mean, he wasn't totally wrong, but there is a bit of like exaggeration going on here or there. Like if we want to talk about anything, I guess we could maybe talk about the hits that the guys have been taking and how that's been affecting them. Like some of the hits they've been taking where they hit the wall and it really jars them and they get these really, I guess they get really sore afterwards, and sometimes it really rattles their head around. But I don't know. I don't. You guys can talk about that if you want, but I've really said about all I care to on the subject.
Yeah, I think my two big issues with this car seem to be how fragile it is in terms of being able to just fix minor damage. And I mean, DVP clock, I've said my piece on that. That's part of it, but it's also so much of this should not be damage that should be terminal. And part of that's because of the car. I mean, this whole toe link thing, I think that's what keeps causing all the cars to skew out. That usually ends up being terminal damage. That should not be happening. And obviously the other thing is, how hard the hits seem to be. We've got Kurt out with a concussion that supposedly was from build up throughout the season, and the wreck that officially sidelined him was pretty minor looking. And I mean, when you see guys like Cody Ware talk about how much he was hurting before he even finally finished it off, and then when you see like in-car footage, like I think there was Suarez last week, that Daytona wreck, his head was getting yanked back and forth. So it was, obviously this car is designed to soften the blow for the really, really hard hits, and we've seen a couple of really big wrecks this year that everybody's gotten away from pretty fine. I think back to the All-Star race with Kyle Busch and Ross and Chase Elliott all crashing really hard there, and Larson had a pretty hard hit too, and everybody seemed fine from that. Weirdly, it seems like throughout the season it's become more of a concern. Like, you would expect that they would be figuring stuff out with it as the season goes along, but it feels like between Kurt's injury and all kinds of other guys, Hamlin too was saying that the Daytona wreck was one of the hardest hits he'd ever taken. It looks like basically nothing. So, like, I wouldn't say I'm too concerned that we're going to see somebody get, like, a really bad injury, but something's got to give here, and I really hope that by the start of next year, all this stuff is sorted out. This has obviously been a big transition kind of year with working out all these new kinks with the car, and for the most part, I would say it's been a net plus for the sport. It's raced great, and that's as important as the safety is. I think just in terms of pure entertainment, that's the biggest thing that matters. It's just that it races really well, and hopefully it continues to race really well. At the very least, the intermediates have been very good, and if they can just work out a few things with the short tracks, with some of the flatter tracks like Phoenix, I think they have a really good thing going here with this car, and so that and the safety stuff is really, and the fact that it's really, really fragile when it gets just so much as, you can guys just spin around and your day's done. So, yeah, there's just a few things that need to work on, but overall, I still think this car has been a plus for the sport. And so, Adam, you said
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people want to bury NASCAR for the safety issues that have cropped up on this car, and that is fair to some degree. I think they probably could have done more vetting of different parts of the car and more testing. But I will say, though, that just due to the supply issues and having, spec manufacturing and all that stuff, they can't really change any of this during the season. So even if they know that, say, that a certain part of the car is a problem, I don't think that it's even feasible for them to remanufacture the part and then get it distributed before the season's over. And that's one downside to having spec parts. But that's kind of where I think we're at. And now I do think NASCAR should be more transparent about it, and they should acknowledge that, hey, we know that X, Y, and Z are a problem, and we're working on it, and we'll have it fixed next year. But I do want to go back to what both of you were saying about the hypocrisy and inconsistency from both NASCAR and the fans regarding safety stuff. That drives me absolutely insane. That it's like, exactly like what Jake was saying, that people are always bemoaning the fact that NASCAR isn't full of real men and they're not tough anymore. And, it's just so easy compared to how it used to be. And yet, then if there's even the slightest hint of danger, they want to stop the race. And I think it's bullshit, frankly. And I think that, we don't need to err on the side of extreme safety for everything. We really don't. I think we should race in the rain on road courses, no matter how hard it's raining. I think we should race as long as there's no lightning directly around the track. I think we should race. And, in Darlington's case, if there's just a couple raindrops falling that aren't even sticking to the track, they should continue to race. And I kind of I'm worried that the Daytona crash is going to set off a bunch of, overprotective safety choices going forward. And that's unfortunate if that's what happens.
Yeah, that reminded me so much. Sorry, I just want to say one thing, and then I'll tell it back. That was very reminiscent of what happened with Loudon last year, where just everybody had an ass rash about that afterwards, and that's even though that was a really great race, one of the best races of the season. That's all anybody seems to really remember it for. And again, it sucks when it happens, and I'm not saying that NASCAR is always right when it comes to these decisions, but sometimes, especially in sport like racing, things like that are going to happen, and you have to accept it.
Yeah, for sure. I think what bothers me and a lot of people is that NASCAR is so reactive rather than proactive, and they just make these knee-jerk decisions. When one bad thing happens, then they have to overreact by a magnitude of 10 by it. That's what I hate.
I think there's definitely arguments to be made on both sides of this whole thing. As far as the NASCAR's not tough anymore, that whole thing, we all know what that's really about, and we don't need to go down that whole rabbit hole. But there's kind of a point to the idea of drivers are now, they don't make it the hard way anymore. They kind of, they get groomed from the time they're really young with all these developmental deals, all these corporate sponsors that kind of, they've got less personality. You've got a lot of, you got the Christopher Bells in the world out there who are just incredibly boring, and their driving backs it up. But I think you don't. It's also refreshing in a way that you have drivers who, they aren't just hypocritical jackasses all the time. Way a lot of the older drivers who bitch about the young guys having no respect. Don't need to name names here, but and then as far as safety stuff, you've got to just be able to find a balance between, putting on the best entertainment product you can, and yet still not being reckless. it doesn't have to be one or the other. It doesn't have to be or pro safety or anti safety. It should be, as with most things, it's somewhere in the middle. And I personally, we can talk about how hypocritical the fans are, but I think a lot of the stuff you see on social media is not from those types of fans. It's from more younger, more technologically savvy type fans who, they weren't around for those days that those fans always go on about, back to the whole back when men were men thing, uh, and these newer types of fans are, I think, more cautious about safety stuff, and but it just kind of, if you just make everything too safe, then it's not fun to watch. But if you make it too dangerous, it's it, people get hurt. That's bad. So I think NASCAR has obviously made a lot of great strides over the decades. We haven't had anyone die in 20 years. We generally see less injuries than we used to 20 years ago. There's always work to be done, and obviously right now, really NASCAR is kind of their own worst enemy with some of the steps back that they've taken this year, both with the car as well as with their officiating. I think that kind of pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, that's a really good point you made about the younger fans who are more safety conscious, that they weren't even around when the old culture of NASCAR was there. And if you started watching in, say, 2010, you haven't seen any deaths or even really serious career-ending injuries during that time. So it's understandable for them to think that NASCAR is and should be extremely safe, and that this year has been a step backwards from that. So I do understand it from that perspective, for sure.
Yeah, it's like
and I just want to be clear, despite what I said earlier, is like, I'm not advocating for racing to be like as dangerous as possible. I sure as hell don't want to see drivers get hurt. And there is definitely a point where the danger factor outweighs the entertainment factor. And I think that was true, for example, in the old IRL. Some of those high-speed oval IndyCar races were just so nerve-wracking when guys were going 200 miles an hour with open wheels, knowing, one touch of the wheel the wrong way and somebody could die. Like, that is not fun. So I do think NASCAR needs to find a balance, and I just hope that they, I hope they can be more proactive and stop just overreacting to things and then reacting to the overreactions. But, we know how they are, and I'm not holding my breath on that.
Yeah, to put a cap on it, I agree with what you guys are saying. Like, the older fans that have still stuck around are too far in one direction, saying that these guys aren't tough enough, and it needs to be more dangerous or whatever else is. And then the newer fans are too far in the other direction, which I think there's a reason for that too. But for the same thing Ryan said, again, that's not a rabbit hole I'd really want to go down. But as far as the toe length thing that we were talking about, if it's still a problem next year, I'll be really upset about it. But for this year, we just kind of got to accept it. And we've all ranted about the DVP before, enough times. We all dislike it. This 4-minute change doesn't, it's a step in the right direction, but it still doesn't really make much difference. With Chase yesterday, he was 4 or 5 laps down in the race anyways, so he wasn't going to be competitive.
So was Kyle Larson, and he got back.
But no, he was only 3 laps down. Chase was 5 laps down or more. But it still makes a difference because you never know how many points could make a difference. Let's say he has another problem in the next race, or whatever, and every point matters, and so it does still matter in that respect. I'm not trying to minimize how stupid this system is. We all want it to go. It was an overreaction to Homestead 2016. Blah blah blah. We've been on it. We've gone on enough about it, so I won't say anymore. But as far as
yeah,
go ahead.
The issue with Chase is that, like I said, that damage should not have been enough to put him that many laps down in the first place. He was able to drive it around completely fine, and it was just the toe link, right, that was broken.
Yeah.
And that's been like a death sentence this year. For what really is just minor cosmetic damage that should take no time at all to repair. And he should have lost probably 2 laps at most from that.
Yeah, well, I agree with that.
Yeah,
it's bullshit, but as long as it's
the TDP clock, that he probably would have finished ahead of Kyle Busch, ahead of Truex, ahead of Harvick, whoever else dropped out, Stenhouse, I think, would have finished probably around 30th. So that's 6 spots he would have gained without the DVP clock, and I feel pretty confident he can bounce back from that. But if he has a bad result at Kansas, it's going to be pretty nerve-wracking for the guy who's been the best driver all season. And yes, the one possible positive thing that could come out of him getting eliminated pretty earlier, not that I think it's going to happen, would be he is Chase Elliott, and even people who don't like him have been saying this, that if he ends up getting eliminated early, it could cause NASCAR to maybe change the playoff format, make it more rewarding of guys who've been the best all season. So that would be maybe the one positive out of him potentially having some sort of early elimination.
He should be fine, but after Harvick in 2020, I'm never going to say anything's a guarantee.
For sure. And I just want to say, too, that I think the DVP clock sucks on its own, and the fragile cars also suck, but then the combination of the two is like this compounding factor that makes it just super irritating. It's like in Chase's case, like, he had a light hit that really shouldn't have damaged the car that much, but it did because the cars are, made of balsa wood. And then it was compounded by the fact that they weren't allowed to spend as much time as they needed to fix it. So it's like, how many times this year have drivers been eliminated from light contact? I think William Byron's had a couple of those just himself. And, and here's the
William Byron special.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember in 2019, like, Matt Tifft, like, DNF'd because, like, a piece of something was stuck in his radiator, and it took him more than 5 minutes to yank it out, and his car wasn't even that damaged. And I forgot what I was going to say.
Ultimate example, I've probably brought this up before, was Matt Kenseth in 2017 at Kansas, when, like, he didn't even have the clock expire on him, but, like, he had too many men over the wall on the pit stop repairing the damage, and they parked him for the rest of the race because of it. So
yeah, that was
like the official
bullshit
moment where I was like, "Fuck the DVP clock. This thing is a complete farce." And and he ended up getting eliminated because of that.
Yeah, and you know what kills me about it is that the teams originally agreed to this because they wanted to eliminate the crash carts to save money on, all the replacement parts they used to tack onto the cars. And that I completely understand and respect. But, like, what does the DVP have anything to do with that? Like, they could continue to outlaw, putting replacement parts on the car, like fenders and that shit, but then let them take as long as they need to fix what's still there. Like, I don't understand how the DVP saves anybody money.
Yeah, generally, I just want to say the history of when NASCAR allows teams to kind of call the shots somewhat is not good at all.
Yeah. Well, if anything, making them repair it so hastily in just 5 minutes, it's only going to lead to more debris littered all over the track from broken parts, because teams are just patching it all together as fast as they can, trying to get up to minimum speed. And, we've seen that a couple of different times in plate races. Guys with damaged cars that probably should have been repaired more thoroughly. They just crash again. Cole Custer just a couple weeks ago at Daytona, and I could probably find a lot more examples of that. So yeah, but we've all said our piece on that. I guess at this point we should probably just look ahead to next week.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. One last thing I did want to say. You brought up Christopher Bell earlier. I know that this is just a little like this. I don't have a problem with what Daniel Suarez said afterwards, like in his review about Christopher Bell, but it is kind of a little pet peeve of mine in general that I've had. Christopher Bell's kind of on all of our crap lists, as you could say at this point, because he's now had 2 or 3 really dumb, pointless incidents recently, on top of the fact that he's about as uninteresting a personality as you can get. And while I did enjoy Suarez's interview later, where he kind of you could tell he got pushed around a lot in that race. Like, it wasn't just Bell. I forget, Blaney, I think, used him up. I think there was one other guy that raced him really, really hard, at a point that it wasn't warranted. And, and he was talking about, well, he's going to get Bell back at some point. And, and I mean, which I understand his frustration. And, I found it really rich, like a lot of the comments that were against him on that. But I am, at this point, pretty sick of all these empty threats from drivers where, these guys, they'll make light contact at some point, and then the other guy will basically just threaten to flip them at some point. And they won't say when they're going to do it, but they're going to do it when it matters, or they're going to do it, it's not going to be at Bristol or Richmond, and you're just going to have to wait and see, and, and we're going to fence them hard and whatever. And, there's been several different guys. I to be honest with you, I'm really, really tired of that. I've said it before. I mean, I know it's uncivilized, and, I'm kind of sounding like a boomer here, but once again, whatever happened to just kicking guys' ass? I mean, whatever happened to that? Jeff Gordon, I've brought this up before, in Kenseth, they beat, or tried to beat, Keselowski's ass when he pulled what he did in 2014. And to me, we've seen all the examples of guys when they try to teach, especially younger drivers, a lesson on the track and do something, it doesn't change how they drive or what they do in the future. I mean, what Kenseth did to Logano in 2015, well, I'm sure at that time that really hurt for Joey, but did it change how he raced everyone after that? Not really. And I don't know. I mean, I know this is kind of off topic and just kind of random, but that's something that I'm annoyed by.
Go ahead.
I mean, I just think I don't exactly miss when guys would try to fight each other over the smallest things. But I mean, I've said it before that NASCAR could use more enforcer type guys who aren't just fake tough guys like Harvick and Hamlin and Brad. Need more. Again, not advocating for something like what Kenseth did to Logano, but he was the type of guy who didn't want to screw around with, but mostly just kind of stayed quiet and minded his own business, but then just kind of reminded you, you can't screw around with him. And that's kind of the more quiet, reserved type of driver that it doesn't seem like we really have any of today. Honestly, I think Chase might be kind of the closest thing to that, especially with, when he gave that interview after Watkins Glen, that was real, total deadpan, passive aggressiveness. That, he's not going to tell you he's pissed off, but he's pissed off. And so, yeah, for people talk about Chase not having any personality, I think it's really kind of a lot more subtle, and I respect that about him. But yeah, we need something needs to change about the way that a lot of guys feel like they can just race with no repercussions because they know other guys are just going to give them empty threats and not really do anything about them. I think Truex has kind of been always the king of that. he ain't gonna win the damn war, and then basically lets Logano go for the championship without even trying to really put up a fight. And yeah, we see it in plate races. It doesn't matter how many guys crash really hard, how many guys get hurt. They still race every single lap like it's the last lap. There's just no give or take, and guys like Logano and Stenhouse and Brad, they just, it doesn't even matter to them. They think they're invincible, and they're never going to change.
Well, and I just want to add to that. Like, I agree that the empty threats are getting very annoying, and the whole, like, I don't know, the whole delayed payback thing that might happen months down the road, I think that's a bunch of BS. Like, I would prefer if somebody roughs you up in a race, then wreck them that race, or at least, get your payback immediately, as quick as possible, and then move on. Don't talk about it on Twitter. Don't just, these guys act like a bunch of middle schoolers sometimes with all these threats, and I'm going to pay you back, and and then they never do it. It's just, it's kind of pathetic to me. So I hope that trend changes in the future, but I'm not really sure it will.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I want to say, do you guys want to talk about IndyCar or Xfinity any, or?
Yeah, I guess I could talk a little bit about the IndyCar title race. Seems like Will Power pretty much has it just about locked up. I'm kind of pulling for either Dixon or Newgarden to miraculously end up winning it. I think Dixon, it's just always incredible to see somebody at his age still as good as he is, and potentially the last time he'll ever have a chance at the title. I think it would be cool for him to get number 7. I've always kind of viewed him as the IndyCar version of Jimmy Johnson, so it would be cool if he ends up with 7 just like Jimmy. And Newgarden has had the best season, I think, by pretty wide margin, at least on a surface level. I have argued for Pato O'Ward, given that he's in very second-tier equipment there, being the most raw, talented IndyCar driver. But I don't know. Power winning the title would just seem a bit strokery. He's had like a bunch of second and third place runs this year, but not really any dominant wins. Although he did have the one race, apparently he like drove all the way to the lead from pretty far back, and I wasn't watching that. But yeah, I guess he probably deserves multiple titles for his career, so it wouldn't be the end of the world. Marcus Ericsson was the one guy I was kind of worried about really stroking his way there just because of the Indy win and the double points, and that's pretty much out of the picture now. And then also, real quick, Scott McLaughlin, he has been incredible over the past couple of, really all year, and he'd probably have a shot at this if not for the 500 and having a bad finish there. And at this point, it's like you have to think maybe next year he's just going to dominate. Maybe not quite to the level he did in Supercars, but it's like this is starting to become too easy for him. Might need to try out NASCAR at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I really would prefer Newgarden to win the title because, I mean, he's been, to me, by far the best driver this year. He has 5 wins to Power's 1. He has 522 laps led to Power's 316. So he's really been a step ahead of everybody else. And, and it's weird because IndyCar's point system usually doesn't reward strokers. But this year, it is for whatever reason. And that's even despite Newgarden out-finishing Power at the double points Indy 500. So, yeah, I hope that, I mean, it's only a 3-point difference. So, I mean, Newgarden could easily win. And I would also be okay with Dixon winning for the reasons Ryan said. I guess, he's close too. He's only 14 behind. Ericsson's only 17. So, yeah, 4 guys have a legitimate shot at winning. Although Ericsson doesn't deserve it at all.
I don't think that's updated. I'm pretty sure Dixon and Newgarden are both 20 behind.
Yeah, they're 20
points
are they?
behind. Okay.
If you're getting that from RR, they don't really update that stuff.
Yeah, F1 and IndyCar results on RR tend to be at least 2 days late these days. So, Power has to finish third or better to guarantee the title is the way it's going to work.
Okay.
I guess just very quickly from the Xfinity race, Sheldon Creed, I think for as much as people were going on about him earlier in the year being a bit disappointing, he's really turned it on as of late, and he's going to get his pretty soon. It was a crazy finish, and I mean, you can't fault Gragson for just doing what he had to do, taking advantage of them, even if he's not the most likable guy in the world. But, yeah, I think for as much hype as Austin Hill has been getting in IndyCar or Xfinity this year, it's like, has Creed really been that much worse, if at all? Especially the past couple of months. He had a ton of bad luck earlier in the year, but I've always thought he's had the higher ceiling of the two of them, and probably is the best bet to be a solid Cup driver in the future. Whereas Hill just kind of strikes me as, a poor man's Austin Dillon, which isn't. I guess that would be kind of like Ty Dillon. So yeah, I mean, great plate racer, but just doesn't really have that flashiness anywhere else. And really hope Creed is able to make the playoffs there. Okay, who's gonna?
So do you want to just make our picks for Kansas and wrap this up?
Yeah, I was going to say, we'd probably be talking a lot more about the finish because it was pretty incredible, but the wrong guy won it from our point of view, so we're not nearly as tempted to go on about it. So.
Mm-hmm. All right. So Kansas next week. I don't really know what to expect. We've seen kind of a lot of different things on these intermediate tracks, and it's been a while since we've been to one, so I don't know, I guess my gut instinct maybe kind of suffering from some Jake-itis in terms of just kind of having a bit of a pessimistic feeling is that Hamlin will win because he's seemed like the fastest intermediate guy lately. He was probably the fastest car at Michigan. I don't know, and it just seems like Abe Hart just has that magic setup for him that seems to be clicking. And so, yeah, I guess he's my pick, but it's going to be a pretty unpredictable race, I think, because we don't really have that gauge of who's really there's nobody like Kyle Larson last year just dominating every single intermediate. And it could easily be probably 8 or 10 different guys with a realistic shot.
Well, and what's, speaking to that unpredictability, what's kind of crazy is that we have not had a 1.5 mile unrestricted race since the Coca-Cola 600. So there's been a long gap for teams to be working on their intermediate setups, and things have evolved since then. So I think we're going to see some surprises, and it's not necessarily going to be the status quo. Now, who will rise to the top? I really have no idea, and I'm looking forward to it because I think there's going to be a lot of parity and a lot of different leaders and different guys contending. My pick is William Byron, and that's because he ran very well at Kansas in the spring before having a mechanical issue derail him. And I don't know, I kind of think that they were, I think that finally getting a good finish at Darlington maybe got that monkey off their back a little bit, and now they can just focus on having speed every week. So that's my pick.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that Byron finally getting another top 10 which means he's suddenly a good driver again, right? Because
Exactly.
No, you're wrong
Yeah.
because he still only has 2 more top 10s than Brad Keselowski this year, so he's not that much better than Brad. You have to understand that.
you were top 10s than Eric Almirola and Michael McDowell.
Or actually, well, yeah, except for McDowell, yeah, who has 11
somehow.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't need to talk about him this week.
Yeah, we
No,
do that
let's not.
plenty enough in the chat, so.
Who was your pick, Jake?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I likewise don't really know who to pick either, really, because it is unpredictable. I mean, it is crazy to think that it's been since Charlotte since we've had a race like this. There's only 8 for the entire season, I believe, which is crazy when you think that basically half the schedule used to be races like these, and now, it's not even a fourth right now. But if I have to give a pick right now, might change later, change my mind. Right now, I'm going to go a bit bold and say Suarez wins. Now, I don't really have, the best of logic to back that up because Trackhouse clearly is not as fast as they were earlier this season. But I don't know. If Suarez still was fast when they went here the last time before he had problems, I think he's going to have a bit of a fire underneath him after what happened during the race. Not just with Bell, but how he kind of threw away a good finish, unfortunately, with a speeding penalty. I think this is right for him. But that being said, that's not a rock-solid pick by any means. I don't know just how good the race will be quality-wise. Like the fact that it's earlier in the year and going to be during the day probably will make it a bit better. But I'm not really sure.
Well,
yeah.
Jake, just to back up your pick, Suarez was probably the fastest car in the Coke 600. He took the lead 4 different times on track and was never passed for the lead. So if they can bring anything close to that kind of speed to Kansas, I think he'll be right up front contending for the win.
Yeah, I'll throw in a dark horse there as well because he has been really good the last couple of intermediates. Bubba Wallace. This could be if Gibbs is still really fast, like they've been on intermediates this year, or Toyota in general. He could really be a sleeper. They seem like they've gotten that whole pit crew issue figured out, and he's been really solid. This could be a great opportunity for him to, shut up the people who are like, oh, his only win was rain shortened or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure Bubba had a top 3 car at Kansas in the spring and just kept getting put in the rear and Kurt won, yeah. So, and then he just had all the pit crew issues, and I think he still finished 10th, even having to drive through the field several times. So, yeah, I could see Bubba actually winning this race, which would be awesome.
Yeah, and to back that up, there was one last little statistic or thing I wanted to bring up. I was actually working on this earlier today. Now, normally, I know that we always crap on average finish and things like that. For sure, I do not think that this is a statistic that is totally representative of performance and, what's completely fair or any of that. But I did do kind of a modification of average finish earlier today, where I did average finish, but only for races where drivers finished on the lead lap. And, and everyone in the top 20 in points has either finished between 16 to 23 races on the lead lap. Right? So, Truex has the most lead lap finishes, so he has kind of the lowest handicap on that. But in average lead lap finishes, Tyler Reddick actually leads the field with an amazing 6.4 average finish, which is crazy. Which, not to be fair, he's only finished on the lead lap in that minimum 16 races, which gives him a bit of a higher handicap, but still, that's really impressive. And right behind him are kind of some suspects you'd expect. Chase is in second, with Larson in third right behind him. Bubba, for the season overall, is 8th. He has an average finish of just over, I think it was right around 10.5. But if you go back and look to just the second half of the season so far since Nashville, he's actually third behind only Reddick and Elliott. 7.8 average lead lap finish since Nashville, which shows that in races where he doesn't have problems and something doesn't break or his pit crew doesn't screw him or whatever, he legitimately has been a top 10 driver for at least the last 2 months, maybe more.
Yeah, it kind of surprises me a little bit that Reddick is first in that, but then, you think about his season more closely, and he's kind of had two different types of races. He either will have winning speed and something happens to him, or he has maybe a 10th place car and then end of the race suddenly shows up and finishes second or third. Last night being a prime example of that. Actually, both Darlington races. So, yeah, it doesn't surprise me that much. But, yeah, interesting stuff. Not really something I think I would take too seriously, given just the kind of randomness of finishes in general. But it does kind of bring up, I touched on it earlier, and I've been tweeting about it all week with the ATDR that I've been developing. I think I finally have a consistent formula that I really like for it. It's very convoluted. I'm not going to explain it, but it's just like ETDR. It has three components, and one of them is the just ETDR itself, and then the other one is a combination of ETDR and its passing component, and one of them is a combination of ETDR and its equipment component. So I can't really explain it any further than that. There's a lot of multiplication and a lot of complicated stuff involved, but I think what I really want to do with it is just kind of take track position and consistency out of the equation even more, because I was experimenting around with EARP last week, and I found a lot of interesting trends with that, with some drivers having better scores with seasons you probably wouldn't expect them to have better scores in, and then worse scores in other seasons when their equipment was better and they weren't as good, but they were having better results or just better average running position stats. So, I think as much as ETDR really kind of gives the equipment component more, makes that into more of a thing, it's still kind of a bit dependent on track position, average running position, and that stuff is pretty volatile depending on just how good the equipment is. So I think with ATDR, I'm not going to be using it as like the gold standard on a race-to-race basis, even though ETDR is not really perfect for that either, especially on road courses, it seems like. But I think as far as from season to season, and especially just when assessing drivers' complete career arcs, especially if their teammates change from year to year or they move to a different team, I think it's really going to be able to shed some light on some things. So, anything else we need to touch on?
That's all I got.
Is that everything from your end?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll wrap things up then. A couple of things. I'm not gonna talk about it really because there's not much to say on it. But an update on F1. There's not really much to say there other than Max has now won 10 out of the 15 races this year. He has over a 4-race points lead in the standings right now, which part of that is because Ferrari have kind of been idiots as usual this year, but at this point, really, it's just been raw domination on Max and Red Bull's part. Guy's a generational talent. I'm not just particularly fond of him, but, I guess it's better than what we've had the last, several years. But, regardless, 30 wins by the age of 25 is an incredible accomplishment. Something that on some level needs to be treasured. Really, I'm not going to speak about the other extracurricular stuff there. So congrats to him. And as far as the other thing, I mentioned on the show last week that I was going to North Wilkesboro for the Cars Tour race that we had. They had there that Dale Earnhardt Jr. was competing in. The final event of like the month, the big August initial revival that the track was having. The last races on the old pavement before they scrape the pavement off. They're going to have some dirt races in October, and then they're going to close it completely for next year for remodeling and repaving and whatever their future plans are. We went on Tuesday night, which was like qualifying night and preparation, where there were a bunch of the like undercard features that were qualifying and practicing and then racing later. I'm not going to say it was the most fun experience because, for one thing, the rain kind of pushed everything back a bit, and the track didn't really seem to have a set plan or even a real plan on how to drive the track. Like it seemed like people were just kind of just running out there with towels half the time and then not doing anything else or whatever. And it was the chairs there are basically like World War II chairs. They're very, very hard to sit in. They're very hard on your posterior. And, you know, we didn't really get to see much racing because it was like an hour and a half wait from the time that there were supposed to be activities. And then there was like 2 hours of like practice and qualifying between the Cars Tour. I did briefly get to see Junior on the track a few times, but then it was just like qualifying for the undercard divisions. And then after about 4 hours, we just left out of there because I couldn't take it anymore. And they didn't finish until like 2 a.m. On that. But I mean, you know, you accept things like that. This track, they got all this done with very little notice, and this is the first time that they've had an event, obviously in 26 years. So I'll give them a pass on that. But Wednesday race night, unfortunately, we did not get to see the race, even though we had prepaid tickets, because, long story short, it took us 2 hours to travel the road that leads to North Wilkesboro. That's about 3.5 miles long. About 2 hours to get from the beginning of that road to the track. And then when we got there to the track, which was still in time to watch, would have still been in time to watch the race, we got turned away, which I don't know whether the track just oversold or if they just didn't think about the parking or whatever it was, but we were definitely not the only people that this happened to. And I think most people did eventually make it in to at least see part of the race, but by the time that we got about 2 miles down the road to where we could have even thought about getting a parking spot, the race had already started, and at best, we would have walked, you know, a long, long ways with, you know, and both of my parent and my uncle that were with me, you know, are not in, like, the best of shape health-wise, and so it just wasn't worth it. We just gave up and came home after that. I already mostly talked about this. Like, I made a Reddit post about it last week that got a bunch of upvotes and comments on it, and as well as I mentioned it on Twitter. And so I'm not going to say much more about it other than, you know, I'm not going to be too hard on the track and its organizers, the people that organize this event, because I understand there's no infrastructure around the track really. Again, there's just that one road that you can really take to get there. And so the traffic jam was inevitable, but they did kind of drop the ball on parking. Like, they should have anticipated the situation better and, you know, made more of a plan for people that paid in advance. Like, I don't have as much sympathy, maybe, I guess, for people that just thought they could stroll up and buy a ticket at the last minute or whatever. But for a weeknight race, which it had to be that way because Junior, you know, that was all he can do with his schedule, with his obligations to NBC. They should have thought about that, but the biggest thing was, for some reason, they had the feature race, the Cars Tour race, with Junior first. And that's the first time I've ever seen that at a short track where that was the case. And even with, like, the traffic and the parking issues, most people, I think, would have been able to see the race if they had on second or third, like 9 o'clock or so. But that knocked us and a bunch of other people out of it. And, and there were other people that probably couldn't have even considered going because they had to come off of work. And it's really unfortunate, but at least in this situation, it does seem like they are taking responsibility for it. Like I've corresponded with the Save the Speedway account on Twitter a bit, and he's been on top of it. And I don't know what they're planning exactly for the people that didn't get to see the race, but they're taking it seriously. And we'll just hope that the racetrack is going to get like its allocation from the state budget after October. I think it's $18 million. And they need to use it wisely because, like all this talk about, can there be a cup race or can't there be a cup race? I want it just as bad as anyone, but I'm just going to tell you, from what I saw Tuesday night, there's going to have to be a massive change for that to be a possibility. I mean, if that track, I know that it was junior, but if the track can't even handle that, there is no way they could handle a cup race, right? And probably not even a truck or Xfinity race. They have to use their money very, very wisely. So, we didn't ask for a refund or anything because we want to support the track and the project. And again, that I don't really want to fault them too much for it. This isn't like a Kentucky 2011 scenario where you had a big NASCAR-backed track or Cup Series track that's backed with millions of dollars by Bruton Smith and SMI. They don't have those resources, so I'll give them a pass on that, but it was disappointing. I can't, sugarcoat that, but hopefully, Junior will be back at some point, and I'll get another chance to see him compete live, and I'm glad for everyone that did get to see the race, that had an awesome time, that, everybody was raving about it, and it's very important what happened, and a big deal for this area and a big deal for the sport. And even though we didn't get to see it, it's still amazing that this happened. And I hope it leads to better things in the future. But I'll end that monologue and wrap it up here. This was an episode of the TRC podcast. Thanks to the crew for being with me again and doing this. The TRC podcast is Ryan, our co-host, head analyst, and statistician. Adam, I guess you could say, is a member of it too. Like I said, our ostensible third member. He's like our co-analyst guy, that really follows and knows the statistics the most. And me, Jake, your co-host, kind of like emotional analyst or whatever you want to call it. And thank you guys for supporting us. As always, I don't know if we will have a show next week or not. It's always kind of on a week-by-week basis. We'll just see how our schedules work. But if we do, we'll try to make it as good as we can, as entertaining as we can. Appreciate all of you listening, and we'll see you next time.